Stories from the category Today I Learned That, Episode 4. Today I learned about something called rejection-sensitive sleepiness. It often shows up in people with ADHD and is basically sudden, overwhelming drowsiness whenever you lose interest in what you're doing. The brain just shuts down from boredom, causing a dramatic drop in alertness. I didn't know this was a thing, but it explains a lot. One time, I literally fell asleep in the middle of a conversation at work. It was a summer job, and a coworker and I had nothing to do for half an hour. She started talking, and since she didn't really need active feedback, I just drifted off. I woke up to her annoyed, "Did you just fall asleep?" I was so embarrassed. Tried to blame it on not sleeping much lately, which was true, but not the full story. After that, she basically stopped chatting with me about life stuff. Luckily, it was just a summer gig. This is also one of the reasons I don't like driving. And if I do drive, I never use cruise control. I need to stay actively engaged, or else my brain goes, "Nap time!" Photographer Robert Landsberg gave his life during the eruption of Mount St. Helens to protect his photos. He laid down on top of his film, letting the ash bury him. 17 days later, his body and the preserved film were recovered. The images were used to document the eruption. Realistically, Landsberg would have died anyway since he was too close to escape, but his actions saved the photos. Mount St. Helens is actually one of my first childhood memories. Our family had a lakeside cabin less than 100 miles from the volcano, and we were there when it erupted. My parents loaded me and my newborn brother into a Volkswagen Zoom bus and drove back to Spokane. I remember a wall of ash falling on us. My mom covered our faces with towels while my dad drove basically in complete darkness. The car kept stalling because the filter got clogged with ash. Somehow, we made it back. In the city, roofs collapsed because the ash mixed with rain and turned into cement-like sludge. The ash was so fine that we had to wear masks outside for weeks. Today I learned Disney has a secret code phrase in case visitors try to scatter ashes at Disneyland. They call it a white powder alert. If other guests hear someone spreading ashes on a ride, that's obviously not great PR. So cast members just announced that a mysterious white powder is being dispersed. Also, if you ever overhear staff calling you our most treasured guest, that's Disney speak for "you're being a total clown shoot and we need backup to handle you." Today I learned that in 1943, an American banker named Donald Triplett became the first person ever officially diagnosed with autism. In the medical records, he was literally case number 1. Of course, autism had always existed, people just wrote it off as someone being quirky. Boomer voice. Back in my day, we didn't have autism. That was just Dave. So what if he's got 800 kilometers of train models in his basement, arranged into a perfect little city? Big deal! He can name every locomotive that's rolled through town for 27 years straight. Totally normal! Today I learned that in 1792, 400,000 Britons boycotted sugar to protest slavery. At the time, the UK population was just 6 million. 70 years later, Manchester factory workers supported a boycott of Confederate cotton during the US Civil War, refusing to process cotton picked by enslaved people. It cost them wages, but Abraham Lincoln later recognized their effort. There's even a statue of him in Manchester. Today I learned that freshwater snails indirectly kill thousands of people every year and are considered some of the deadliest creatures to humans. It's like the snail will follow you forever until it doesn't end well. They carry a parasitic flatworm living in dirty water that can kill people. Even so, they only account for roughly 10,000 to 200,000 deaths annually. By comparison, the deadliest animal is the mosquito, spreading disease via its contaminated little proboscis. Today I learned that the highest reliably recorded IQ belongs to mathematician Terence Tao. His confirmed IQ is 230. For comparison, the highest IQ in history is often attributed to James Sidis, allegedly between 250 and 300, which would place him in the top 0.001% of humanity. The average IQ is 100, and people are considered gifted at 130 plus. Sidis was a child prodigy, reading at 1.5 years old and speaking multiple languages fluently as a teenager. Some critics, however, believe media hype may have inflated his scores. Terence Tao, born 1975, is an Australian-American mathematician. From a very young age, he showed extraordinary mathematical abilities. By 7, he was already in high school studying calculus. He completed his bachelor's at 16 and earned a PhD at 21, all while maintaining a normal social life. Today, he's married with children and has fully realized his talent. Over the years, he has received numerous prestigious awards, including the Fields Medal, the Nobel of Mathematics, and a MacArthur Genius Grant. Tao is currently a professor of mathematics at UCLA, holding the James and Carol Collins Chair. In interviews, he downplays talk of genius, emphasizing hard work, intuition, knowledge, and a bit of luck. He has published 17 books, over 300 research papers, and even served as a science and technology advisor to US President Joe Biden. Interestingly, Terrence's brother became an international chess master and is also a talented musician. Today, I learned that $2 bills in the US are still printed and in circulation. They seem rare because people think they're rare, start collecting them, and then they rarely make it back into circulation. Another reason, banks usually don't order $2 bills for cash drawers, so they hardly ever appear as change. Steve Wozniak, co-founder of Apple, is known for his quirky use of $2 bills. He buys uncut sheets from the U.S. Bureau of Engraving and Printing, turns them into perforated notepads at a print shop, then tears them off like stickers. He uses them in everyday transactions just to mess with people and have a laugh. Today I learned the lost city of Petra was rediscovered by a Swiss explorer who basically went full undercover mode. He mastered Arabic, adopted local customs, and earned the trust of Bedouins so they'd guide him through the canyon leading to the city. He played the long game, and it worked. Honestly, I'd probably just hire someone else to do the exploring, but this dude did it all himself. What's striking is the contrast with many British explorers who just barged in and wrecked things. He approached it with subtlety and respect, and wow, Arabic is a seriously tough language. Also, can you really call Petra a lost city if the Bedouins always knew where it was? They just weren't letting outsiders in. It was more of a hidden city. The Bedouins even used Petra's structures for target practice. To this day, you can see urns on top of the monuments with bullet marks. Another cool fact, recent excavations uncovered Roman mosaics there, as well preserved as the ones in Herculaneum. Oh, and speaking of legends, a Canadian engineer once built a working replica of Thor's hammer. It could only be lifted by someone worthy, i.e. wearing the iron ring that all Canadian engineers receive in a ceremony called the Ritual of the Calling of an Engineer. The ring triggered an electromagnet inside the hammer, letting the engineer lift it while everyone else failed. On the set of Succession, the showrunners brought in rich life consultants. One detail they taught, when stepping out of a helicopter, the ultra-wealthy don't duck their heads. You've been doing it your whole life. You know where the blades are. You just walk out calmly. I used to work at a helipad, so I'll say this. Strong wind can push the blades lower, and yes, they can bonk you if the engine's off and the rotor is slowing down. But if the engine is running, even another helicopter landing nearby won't create enough gust to make the blades drop that far. I also fly helicopters for work sometimes, and even my pilot with 30 years of experience ducks his head and tells us to do the same. So it's not really about right or wrong, it's storytelling. When the Roy family exits calmly while everyone else ducks, the audience instantly understands the difference without it being explained. Classic show, don't tell. Today I learned that once Jeffrey Dahmer accidentally drank the sleepy juice he had prepared for someone else. When he woke up the next day, the would-be guest had robbed him, took $300 and a watch. Dahmer never reported it anywhere. A few years earlier, when he was still living with his grandma, he lured a guy named Ronald Flowers Jr. over. After giving him some extra spicy coffee, his grandmother called from the other room. "Is that you, Jeff?" Even though Dahmer tried to sound like he was alone, she figured out he had company. Because of that, Dahmer couldn't go through with his plan. When Flowers passed out, Dahmer ended up driving him to the county hospital instead. In 2022, actor Matthew Perry calculated how many times he had attended AA meetings. Turns out, 6,000 times. If you divide that by 365, that's about 16.5 years of daily meetings. That's just wow. Right now I'm watching Friends and I'm on season 4. People told me to pay attention to how Perry's appearance and weight changed, since it reflected his real struggles at the time. There were seasons with the goat beard look, others where he was super skinny running on sad snacks, and others where he looked bloated thanks to mystery potions. It's rough knowing all of that was happening off camera get immortalized on screen. Today I learned that the UK Passport Office once refused to issue a passport to a 6-year-old girl named Khaleesi because Warner Bros. Had trademarked the word. After the story hit the media, it turned out you can't actually trademark a birth name. Trademarks only apply to goods and services. The decision was overturned. I've got a rare name myself that also happens to be from a popular TV show. Facebook still flags it as fake, refusing to let me use my real name. Reminds me of the time Microsoft banned someone's Xbox account because they listed their location as Fort Gay. That's a real town in the US. The mayor himself had to step in before Microsoft admitted their oopsie and lifted the ban. Between 2011 and 2019, at least 3,500 American girls were named Khaleesi or Daenerys, with the usual spelling disasters, Khaleesi, Daenerys, etc. In 2018, there were even 19 babies named Khaleesi and 5 named Khaleesi. Since 2014, Khaleesi has been in the top 1,000 baby girl names in the US every single year. Daenerys never cracked the top 1,000, but still gets over 100 uses annually. The abolition of slavery in Britain is historically remarkable because it happened mostly due to enormous public pressure on Parliament. The anti-slavery movement was so influential that more people signed petitions for abolition than had voted in the most recent election. The final law wasn't a government bill, it was a private member's bill. It even became fashionable to wear a symbol of abolitionists, a badge showing a black man kneeling in chains with the caption, "Am I not a man and a brother?" In 2016, a man in China took a selfie with a walrus. The walrus attacked, dragging him into the water. Zoo visitors and staff initially thought it was play. The walrus's longtime trainer jumped in to help, but the animal also attacked him. Both men were pinned and drowned. The walrus weighed roughly 1.5 tons. Today I learned there was a mobile game called Send Me to Heaven. The goal was to throw your phone as high into the air as possible. The developer created it hoping to accidentally yeet as many iPhones as possible. Apple quickly banned it from the App Store, but Android still had a knockoff version. I actually played it on my old beat-up phone. I would zip it into a plastic bag and toss it into a swimming pool as hard as I could. The game even had local and global leaderboards. I was the #1 player in my area, with a record of about 10 meters. One day, I missed the pool entirely, and that's when my career as a pro phone thrower ended. There was also an app called I Am Rich. It cost $1,000 and did nothing except display a glowing red gem. 8 people actually bought it before Apple deleted it from the App Store. Fun fact, there's still a clone of it on Android. Today I learned that Wes Anderson uses a fixed pay system, where every actor gets the same fee. He started this on Rushmore after Bill Murray agreed to take the same paycheck as then unknown 18-year-old Jason Schwartzman, just so Murray could leave early for a golf tournament. It makes sense. Anderson's films aren't blockbusters. Actors join not for the paycheck, but because they believe in the art. It's basically the opposite of Hollywood, where people sign on for the money and the script could be absolute spaghetti. You could also argue that paycheck roles in big forgettable movies indirectly finance passion projects like Anderson's films. Actors can afford to lower their income for the sake of art. Also, fun fact, back then, Jason Schwartzman really was an unknown, but his uncle is Francis Ford Coppola, which makes him Nicolas Cage's cousin. Today I learned that in 2009, Ken Basin became the first contestant on the US version of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire to mess up the $1 million question. He debated whether he'd regret walking away with $500,000 or risking it and failing. He chose to risk it, lost $475,000, and walked away with just $25,000. The final question. For ordering favorite drinks, President Lyndon Johnson installed 4 buttons in the Oval Office: coffee, tea, Coca-Cola, and what? Ken answered, Yoo-hoo. The correct answer, Fresca. If it's a pure guess, I'd probably take the $500,000. A 100% chance to walk away with $500,000 versus 75% risk of losing nearly everything. It reminded me of Norm Macdonald on the charity episode of Millionaire. He delivered answers instantly, completely killing the tense vibe Regis tried to create. Regis begged him to slow down, think, and Norm would just shrug. Nah, it's definitely B, or some other letter. And he was right every single time. When they finally reached the $1 million question, Regis pleaded with Norm to think of the kids who would benefit. Norm agreed and took $500,000 for the kids. Then Regis suggested just checking the final question anyway. Norm answered effortlessly and nailed it again. The look he gave Regis at the end, priceless. Today I learned that during World War II, the French car company Citroën was forced to make vehicles for the Germans. The company president, Pierre-Jules Boulanger, started sabotaging production. First he slowed things down, then he redesigned the oil dipstick so it showed all good even when the car was running dangerously low on oil. Result? The cars kept breaking down. It seems like Citroën workers still have that chaotic neutral energy, doing everything possible to make their cars unreliable. Maybe someone should send in a cranky old French general to calm them down. Fun fact, you can actually find sabotage manuals that the Allies distributed in Nazi-occupied territories. They included sneaky ways for civilians to mess with the enemy's day-to-day life. There were even guides for railway workers on how to accidentally mess up ticketing or lose officers' luggage. One document suggested stealing a metal file, crushing it into powder, and sprinkling it into machinery so everything would break faster. Another trick was malicious compliance, strictly following quality standards to the point where perfectly good equipment was labeled defective. That way you look like an overachieving employee instead of a saboteur. Today I learned that in 2022, 90% of all complaints to Dublin Airport came from one person. He filed over 23,000 complaints that year, averaging 84 per day. Either he automated it or he had a very intense hobby, most likely automation. We had a similar guy in my city. For planes, noise limits were tracked in decibels. He set up a system to automatically submit complaints every time it was exceeded. Didn't work, the law was just changed instead. Today I learned Eminem once turned down a joint tour with Dr. Dre and Snoop Dogg, a tour that could have earned him $100 million. His reason? No. The tour would be too long and I wouldn't get to see my daughter Haley. Quote, "I don't want to go on tour and then come back to find out Haley's already grown up." 50 Cent has said many times that Eminem almost always declines offers. He's turned down movies, shows, and cameos, usually just saying no. The rare times he agrees, it's either because a close friend asked or because the project also includes his friends. Turns out my mom had a cousin born around 1930, 1933 who was later diagnosed with autism, though only in adulthood. She was a savant. A newspaper even wrote about her. Without ever taking music lessons, she could play any piece on piano after hearing it just once, but she struggled heavily with social interaction. On a family pilgrimage trip, she recited every single station where the train had stopped on the way back. My aunt remembered how she lacked social awareness, like randomly snatching hats off her mom's friends. Eventually, guests just stopped coming over. At 17, she was sadly placed in the psychiatric hospital after nearly strangling my then 10-year-old aunt. Not out of anger, she thought it was a game. I always worried she'd been forgotten, as often happened back then. But thankfully, her sister moved to England, took her in, and arranged for her to live in a specialized home nearby. She was visited daily and well cared for. Thanks so much for watching. Drop a comment below telling us what you learned today. Don't forget to check out our other videos. Have a great day, buddy. See you tomorrow.